What is up, everybody, and welcome back to King Pilled. This is the third stream of the day. If you've joined me for all three of them, then you're an animal. Thank you very much. I appreciate you. This one actually worked. It looks like it's streaming to YouTube, so that's a good thing. This morning I did the astrolabe as usual. I do that every Monday through Friday at 10 Central Time. Had a good time with that one, and then I talked to Wade Stotts from the Wade Show. Had a really good time with that this afternoon. So if you haven't hit those yet, then as soon as you're finished with this one, go back and watch those. But tonight, I am joined by two shockingly handsome gentlemen. Unfortunately, we are none of us are face fagging tonight. But Dimes, who has been on the show before, you guys know and love him. We love him in spite of his Canadianness. And new guest tonight, we've got Meta Prime. What's up, guys? How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having us. Excited to chat a little bit. I also have to put up with Dime's Canadianness all the time. But we love him anyway.
What's up, Dimes? How you doing?
Here, I don't know if I'm going to have connection issues for this whole thing. So I've reset a total fucking meme. So of course there's connection issues, but I hope that doesn't interrupt anything.
Well, as is usual with King Pilled, we are besought by connection issues and starting late and all these things. These are now traditions for the channel here. So if anything comes up, then we're just gonna keep on plugging through it. Hopefully you guys enjoy a more casual, laid-back stream tonight. We're gonna be talking about some important stuff, and it's been funny. Meta Prime here has been posting about some of these things and getting some very funny pushback. So I think we're going to talk about some of that, and then get into some ideas of where we are now, what's been happening, what's happening now, and where we go moving forward. Before we jump into that real quick, I made a little visual presentation of that kind of sums up the conversation that we're going to be having. If I share my screen here real quick, then you guys can get a little sneak preview. So as you can see, I put our faces on these guys, and I put mine in the middle and a little bit higher, so that should indicate to you guys that I think I'm better than everyone else. But this is how we expect the conversation to go. We may get some haters in the comments, maybe not. I kind of hope we do, because it's kind of fun when you got haters. And the funny thing is, the more comments, the faster the comments fly, the better it is for the algorithm. So around these parts, we believe in monetizing haters. So hopefully they show up tonight. If not, then we're still going to have a great conversation. So we're using the King Pill channel here as a platform to have this conversation, because we here happen to believe very much in this message. But I know that, Meta, you've been doing a lot of work on this for a while. You actually retweeted today a thread that you'd done in January, I think, that was, looking back, it was very prescient. And then you and I started talking, and we're very much in the same wavelength. So we wanted to get into having this conversation more in a long form format. So where do you think we should kick this off?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to just kind of little introduce myself, talk a little bit about my content, because I do think it's relevant to that. It's kind of why I felt so obligated to kind of step up and kick the hornet's nest and call out the emperor not having any clothes here. To give you guys a little bit of background, yes, the rumors are true. I was a leftist growing up. I grew up, kind of liberal middle class family on the East Coast, not so far outside of New York City.
So you're Canadian too.
Yeah, I'm a spiritual Canadian by birth, but not by I've since transcended. But yeah, so for me, a lot of millennials my age, we kind of grew up not really paying too much attention to politics. The extent of my politics growing up was I was like a little bit of like a punk rock kid, and obviously didn't like the war in Iraq, that kind of stuff. But you always have this prevailing sentiment among Democrats, especially in like the coastal elite, where we're the smart ones, we're the progressive ones. Like Dimes had this really great point on one of his more recent podcasts where he's talking about progressives like to frame what they're doing as the inevitable future, right? If we're smart, if we're progressive with this, these are the ideologies that we're going to end up with. And so that was always kind of the prevailing mindset. And then, 2016 changed everything for me. I was paying a lot more attention to politics. And yeah, initially, I haven't been shy about this in the past, but people are giving me a lot of shit about it. But, I was kind of paying attention to Bernie. And what really woke me up was just how much the DNC was obviously astroturf for Hillary. And then once that kind of clicked and the media lying, was made apparent, I started following down the rabbit hole. I listened to, it was like War by Breitbart and Clinton Cash and a lot of that stuff. And then I also went all the way down the rabbit hole, the conspiratainment rabbit hole, like to, Anunnaki and like lizard people and all that kind of stuff. So it was a very harrowing experience. I burned a lot of friendships. And this is why that kind of content of like, okay, if you're someone who wakes up to all this stuff, like how do you find like a normal, healthy state of existence post red pill, right? Post awakening. And because that was really hard for me personally. And so when I got on the scene around COVID, like 2020, later 2020, I started following people in the sphere, and I was like, oh,
did we lose him?
Okay,
sorry, I might have cut out.
that was just me.
But I basically realized, yeah, I think so. I'm like just now locked into my new place here in the Pacific Northwest, and not everything functions perfectly. It's been but yeah, so for me, when getting into the sphere and not seeing any kind of content around how do you find a healthy existence post red pill, focusing on establishing yourself in a new set of truths, getting into self-improvement, and then actually trying to make a difference. And again, there's a lot of people saying things that resonated with me, right? There's pushback on COVID and the vaccines and the lockdown, which I liked. There's talking about, I've basically focused on two aspects now as I'm kind of like writing more about everything that's been happening. And it's basically human biodiversity and the destruction of Western civilization. Like those are the things that, have gotten mainstream at this point. And I saw a lot in the event that was created. And so that's what pulled me into the space. But I've always kind of been doing my own thing. I've always been kind of following this like spiritual kind of like, motivative, transcend, find the parallel movement kind of thing. I've been doing a lot of networking, trying to meet people. And I know that's like very taboo in the Anon space. Oh, you don't want to meet people. Like everyone's a Fed and they're going to get you. But, for me, that seemed like a necessary thing. If we were actually going to make progress, on the ground. And it wasn't about, doing anything crazy or Fed posty. It was just, let's build stuff. Let's build alternative education systems, finance systems, just be able to, like farm locally, more independence, right? And then finding other guys like that you can be around. And so, when all of this Trannygate stuff kicked off, I felt like, oh, it should be easy to disavow a lot of these ideas that are starting to form in the scene. You mentioned the thread that I put together about the dangers of becoming more popular, and I think that's really started to accelerate and come to a head now. And the good thing about all this is just been meeting a lot of people who, because of the hate that I'm getting, and because of the engagement that sends my stuff through the roof and exposes me to a lot of people who wouldn't normally see my content, I'm finding a lot of people who actually resonate with this idea of, hey, we should actually build stuff and we should be virtuous people working hard. It's not sexy, right? to be like, hey, you got to do work and you got to be a good person. But, I think a lot of people realize that is the next step. And all of this is really just bringing into stark contrast how much of this kind of like rage bait porn exists in the digital sphere around these ideas.
Real quick times before before we hear from you on some of this, do us a favor, Meta, and break down the Trannygate thing, because we didn't really cover it here, and I sort of tracked it adjacently, sort of. I didn't get super finagled up into it, but I know you definitely did. So give us a quick rundown on what happened there.
If I could just say one thing really quick first, like just an example of the type type of tweet that meta one that might be seen as controversial. You had one which I agree with, which was it was something like biological, like basically race realism and the West falling are relevant but insufficient. Was the exact tweet, if you could repeat it, because I think like that sort of sentiment shouldn't necessarily be as controversial as it turned out being.
Yeah, it was human biodiversity and the destruction of the West are necessary but not sufficient. And what I'm basically getting at there is, again, that rage bait porn of, don't you feel bad, bro? Like, oh, aren't you so oppressed, bro? Like all of this kind of stuff without any real kind of positive message or potential for next step. And we'll definitely get into it. I've been putting together an article on this, and it's really helped me clarify a few things. But I think one of the reasons I'm getting so much pushback in the sphere is because a lot of these accounts who have kind of made their name on what is effectively rage bait porn, now that it's getting popular, they realize that there's going to be an inflood of all of these other grifter people. It's going to be harder for them to maintain a name for themselves, especially among the people who, like the good people who are in the space who actually do want to do something. Like this split, somebody in our chat had done a really good job characterizing. They basically said this is now the anti-mainstream, or like the mainstream counterculture is what this kind of like I call it like degenerate doomer vitalism is becoming. I know Matt, you have some terms for this, and I was talking to some other guys in your sphere, and you guys have been creating good language around this. But I think effectively these guys feel threatened because their market share is going to be challenged by a lot of these new people coming into the space. There's also the problem of if you're attracting people who are excited about the ability to say the N-word and all of this kind of stuff, but they're not actually changing their fundamental progressive politics. Well, if you're going to grab those people, you're going to have to slide left. You're going to have to slide into these like progressive ideologies as a way to stay competitive as a take seller. And they really don't want someone in the sphere kind of pointing out that they're willing to compromise their values, because then it's just going to shed off all of these followers who actually are aligned and want to do something.
We got a $5 super chat here from Old Head Norwood Groiper 2016. He says the effeminate shaming and policing of relationships on Twitter is insufferable. All caps, you know who you are. So what's interesting here is I kind of stuck my dick in the Groiper hornet's nest last week. And it was just I saw Nick tweeted something basically calling Orrin McIntyre a Fed essentially, and just it would just the Charles Haywood had responded to him and said like this, in what way is this possibly helpful or productive in any sort of way? If you're someone who's at the point where you think that Orrin McIntyre is like not useful or is a net negative in some way, I can't help but sincerely question your motivations. And what's funny is I said this all very explicitly. I said, like, this is stupid and gay. We'd like quit behaving like a bunch of like nagging petty women. And these guys all started telling me, well, you're being passive aggressive. And I'm like, I'm literally calling you a fag. Like, to your face. I'm telling you that your entire shtick is stupid and gay. That you're just sitting around here whining and crying about how everything sucks. But anytime someone asks you to do something beyond posting, you start saying, oh, everyone's a Fed. It seems to me that there's nothing that is more Fed-like than the notion that we should not be coordinating or organizing or meeting each other in real life or building lasting relationships, building lasting companies, pursuing various initiatives, following our passions after our God-given passions to innovate and create and build as men. Like, that seems very Fed-like to me. No, you should just stay in your coon pod and post. You shouldn't be actually getting out and meeting people. That seems like the Fed thing to me. What do you guys think?
Well, they're trying to keep people plantations because that's how they make their money. And that sounds like a very reductive way of explaining. You see this with a lot of organizations that have been around for a while. They're realizing that, as you'd mentioned before, a lot of our ideas are becoming more accepted by the mainstream. So we don't have ownership over a lot of the talking points that we used to once have. Anti-Zionism, nihilism would be another. So basically, whenever you hear say, start calling people feds, or start, if they use the phrase only game in town, that's when you know that they're basically just trying to find financial base more than anything. And I really don't want to name, but I think there's a lot of names that are probably springing to people's minds. But that's when you look at that, like, oh, this is just a nakedly, it's not even really based on anything ideological. That there's too many people where this is their job and this is the only way they know how to keep the fucking funds flowing.
One of the ways that this was really made evident to me was when this recent chick who is making all the waves. She's the new conservative influencer or whatever, and she's doing it by being really provocative and cussing a lot and saying fag and nigger and pushing all of the boundaries. And everyone's falling into this thing, like debating over, is she good? Is she bad? Is she real? Is she not? Is she like, none of this is really relevant to me. Like what stands out to me is the fact that, like, this is evidence of what you're talking about all these ideas becoming mainstreamed, is what's whether she's like authentically just some chick who's posting, or she's being paid by Black Rifle Coffee. In either case, what this indicates is that these ideas are becoming acceptable to the mainstream. So if your entire shtick has just been trafficking in the realm of ideas, it's not that is bad per se. That's great. We need people who traffic in ideas. But once you start walling off and saying and trying to dissuade people from actually beginning to take risks and build things and cooperate and start building out social networks and really leaning in the face of all the censorship and the desire to atomize all of us, the only thing I can conclude then is that you don't want to see your grift go away. Mm-hmm. And many of these guys have made their entire shtick has been built on their OPSEC and their anonymity and how they're super edgy boys because they drop hard R's on Twitter behind an anonymous profile, and they have to keep that anonymous profile because, oh no, someone might know that they're calling women fat, and they might lose something because of that. Well, if it becomes fashionable to call women fat, then
you've got some woman out here dropping hard R's to get a second career. I want to see women dropping hard R's for free because they feel it, not because they can get some money.
Word. So Meta, you identified this, and you saw this coming a long time ago. I've been coming along and kind of figuring it out as I've been going. We coined the term Goonic a little while ago to refer to these types of guys, because what I realized is many of them have very fascinating observations. Like I genuinely appreciate a lot of the things that they've said. They've even been productive in moving me along. Yet when you really what's the call to action? What's the meaning in it beyond just here's some information, do whatever you want with it? What's the actual impetus behind all of this? And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that a lot of this is just nihilism. It's really just like it's wrapped in this right-wing dissident Chad. I'm appropriately racist and sexist, so you can trust me package. But what they're selling is nihilism. It's just sit around and wait for daddy to come save you because everything's so fucked up and the entire system's rigged against you and there's nothing you can do about it. And here's all the reasons you should be angry. And this is content that's tailored perfectly to capture the minds of angry young men. And the worst thing you want to do with angry young men is tell them, yes, you should be angry. You should get angrier, but there's nothing you can do about it. That's how you break a guy's brain.
And so, Meta, I unfairly cut you off earlier because I wanted to create some context with an example tweet, but maybe now is the time to actually explain what it is we're referring to, because some people might be lost.
Yeah, sure. So two things, or one thing before I jump into kind of the timeline of Trannygate. The first is, and we're kind of really starting to articulate this idea, is we're at this inflection point, right? We're at this point where initially in order to really move culture, you needed people to understand human biodiversity and the fall of, Western civilization, the intentional destruction of Western civilization. And, my good friend, Lucas, Schizo Freak, he's fantastic. His content is, the dude's just another level of brainiac. But he made the point that if you're going to do something on the internet, you kind of have to make things funny. You have to make them cool. You have to make them interesting and edgy, and you got to mock people, and you got to seem like a badass, right? People don't want to engage with content that's just kind of like facts and logic, unless you're not like a super autist, and there's definitely a place for those guys. And so a lot of the early Anon work was, how do we make racism funny? How do we meme like Aryan supremacy and all this cultural stuff like into the zeitgeist, and they did a great job, right? They won.
Right.
They won the culture war. But the problem that we have now is twofold. One is there needs to be a step after that, right? This was all laying the groundwork for the next step. And then two, you've gone from this environment where memeing these things was cancelable. You were doing it because you were pursuing truth and not because there wasn't any other benefit really to doing it. And now that it's cool, now that it's edgy, now people will do it just because it's cool and edgy, right? And that's the problem that we have is, there's no longer any real disincentive. And so if you're trying to use that kind of metric as a method of gatekeeping, right? Well, that's not going to work anymore, because you're going to have troons who are saying, the hard R, and that doesn't mean that they're like people who are your friend.
If I can give an example of that, I'm just going to name one name because it springs to mind. So there's this podcast called Red Scare, and Anna Kay. She had this quote once that said, "Ideas are my cocaine." And so that's why you might see a post-left podcast like Red Scare kind of get more interested in this space, get interested in the vitalist movement. But that's an example of what he's talking about, where you're just going to get ideological junkies. You're going to get people who are here because and it's new. And we've made this case on our show before a few episodes ago that and this will probably lead into what we're going to talk about more. It's a conflict between ideas and priors or first principles. So one thing that we've bit of an old head. We've had our show for a while. Prior to that, I was in the space under a bunch of different names, but I have direct experience with a lot of these formative groups and whatnot, and seeing all the drama and the lore of this hilarious space. But sorry, I completely lost my train of thought there. I don't want Meta Prime lost in his train of thought either. But yeah, I was going to say,
you were talking about Red Scare.
Yeah, I was going to say, what we used to believe, we believed really in red pilling. We believed of introducing people to ideas and concepts, and they would propagate like a virus. And what we've noticed is that our ideas are doing that right now. Kanye West, if you had told people 7 years ago, one of the top 5 known people on reading 4chan Paul threads, and that everyone in America had to have an opinion on the Jewish question, we would think that was preposterous. But we did. We actually, ideas are in the mainstream. Great replacement in the mainstream. But really happening, because it turns out ideas aren't enough to just change the zeitgeist, because people can take ideas and with whatever their first principles, or their kind of take those ideas and mold them to whatever they want. Individual, I give this example with a guy named Bronze Age Pervert. In mindset, he started talking about this idea of the law. And if you ask people, if you ask like 5 different, they'll have a different definition.
Uh-oh.
I think we lost him for a second there.
Can you hear me now?
So, you were talking about the longhouse.
Yeah.
Basically, I'll try to speak in smaller chunks. Longhouse changes based on whatever group has just heard about it. It becomes the a fucking Trojan horse. They fill it with their own ideas. So what we're finding is that our ideas, when they meet the first principles of other groups, are being changed. So we need to start thinking more about first principles and what actually drives people rather than just more popular, because those ideas can also be used against us. And I think that's what a lot of people are noticing right now, because we've had some rhetorical wins so the past 5-10 years, and things don't seem to be okay. Sorry, I'm going to try and speak in smaller chunks so I don't cut out.
Real quick, Meta, Josh Ham here in the chat, good friend of the show, he says this idea of instilling red pill ideas, this idea that instilling red pill ideas will result in any change sounds very similar to Lolberts and the Fed. And I was going to say this myself, that this happened shortly after 2020. There was a group of us, Pete Quinones and Buck Johnson and Mark Claire and a few other guys and I, that we were basically dyed-in-the-wool libertarians, and we come up through the Hoppe school of libertarianism, like hardcore ANCAPs, and we ran into 2020 and all the events of 2020, both the medical type and the electoral type, and all of this just it rattled us. We were like, okay, what the fuck's going on now? And one of the things that became very clear, as good friend of the show Pete Quinones liked to say back then, he doesn't really need to anymore. He'd say, stop living in Ancapistan in your head. And the idea occurred to me that I was like, okay, so say I could snap my fingers and end the Fed and abolish the state and all these other whatever slogans, and I live in that world, then what would I be doing with my time? What would I be invested in? What would be my interests and my hobbies? And why am I not doing that now? Is the state preventing me from doing those things? Maybe they get in my way or they make things hard or whatever. But so, like, coming from a libertarian perspective, I saw this exact same behavior. And several of us saw this, and we were like, okay, this is gay. You guys need to stop acting like this. We need to stop acting like this. We need to actually live in the world that exists and not just think that, by some magic of, by our own admission, we didn't believe in this idea that, people are just going to, we're proponents of elite theory and stuff. People aren't just going to, like the grassroots plebs, take on these ideas and magically everything changes. No, like, you have to have institutional power. You have to build capital. You have to be able to actually move the culture and make your own imprint on it beyond just sharing ideas and hope that people come along with it and then hope somebody else comes along and does something about it. This is that itself is a very passive, feminine way of doing things. The woman's job is to go out and say, hey, something's wrong, do something about it. The man's job is to find the solution and actually do something about it. So I wanted to highlight his comment there because it squared directly with what I was about to say.
Yeah, and that's always been a big thing for me is, where do we go once we win, right? This is very similar idea that gets bumped around in like the tech accelerationist crowd, right? Is they're just like, oh, we just need to innovate, and everything will kind of figure itself out. And yet, the common, point that a lot of good accounts will make is, well, what are you innovating towards? Like, what kind of civilization do you want to create with all this technology? If you don't have a clear understanding of that, you have this danger of just progressing into what you can kind of consider like the yeast life, just life for life's sake. You have the fat black woman eating chicken and on the, on the table, just like constantly getting shoved down her throat. It's like, yeah, we can keep those people alive, but like, is that kind of like the beautiful future that we want to, create? Like, definitely not.
Right. Yeah. And this sort of thing is demoralizing too. Like, to be, your mind is a spiritual thing. And so to be confronted with degeneracy constantly, to have it constantly shoved in your face, this doesn't motivate people. This doesn't move people. It demoralizes and depresses and psychs them out. So it actually becomes counterproductive. Like, there has to be a balance here. Like, you have to be able to present what's happening, but then when it becomes all that you're doing, and this is what the entire sphere is doing, is just sitting here and just constantly reasserting to each other, oh, yeah, things really suck, don't they? Yeah, everything's awful. Oh, it sucks. This new bad thing happened to me today. Everything sucks. Like, this is just spiraling off of a cliff.
Yeah, and the big concern, like the why I felt degenerate doomer vitalism seemed like a good term of, to encapsulate these ideas, is because that's kind of what it is to me. It's just this everything's going to shit, and so we're going to give you an excuse to kind of dance in the rubble, right, and forgo any sense of responsibility, and to build anything, and you can just give in to all of your desires. And it's the guys online who are like, just go fuck a bunch of chicks and run a bunch of crypto scams and just loot, and don't get me wrong, there's bleeding the beast, which is a good thing, right? If you can take advantage of the government programs or whatever, right? But to compromise or to use the environment around you as an excuse to not take responsibility or not do anything, I think it's just as bad as all the left-wing messages that we hate.
Yes, I think that's one of my favorite points that you made in one of your tweets recently, where you said that like using the environment as an excuse for inaction is not going to cut it. It's gay. It's very passive. It's very feminine. And what's really ironic about all this is that the observations of the Longhouse and such memes is that the people that are trafficking in them and that are harping on them and really kind of doing nothing but just going back over them over and over and over again, is that they are themselves acting in a really feminized way. They're responding to a feminized problem in a feminized manner. But the masculine, we're dying for true masculinity. We're dying for actually strong men to step up and do strong man things. And it's hard. It's difficult. It means taking risks. It means having to exercise wisdom. These things are in short supply, which means it's all the more essential that we get as many people beginning to look in this direction as possible. We have an opportunity now. Now we have some cover. There's cover fire being laid down across a whole bunch of different domains, which gives us a great opportunity. And there's also, if you look at all the economic crises, well, this just means there's a bunch of stuff on sale. And there's going to be massive wealth made over the next 10 or so years as the crisis worsens. So the question is then, who's going to be making that wealth, and what causes is that wealth going to be put toward?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is something that I've been talking to a number of accounts with for a while now. You can kind of see what's happening in Europe. They're probably going to go through a sovereign debt default. And so they're trying to hold that off. They were trying to jam CBDC, but not only do you have Jamie Dimon and Jay Powell kind of fighting against that, but now you have, Vivek and Trump. And, I keep referencing your episode where you go on Pete Quinones' show and you talk about the PayPal mafia. Like, to me, that episode put so many pieces together, because I saw some of these moves, and I've always been kind of like a pro Elon guy. But to see the kind of the extent of the pieces coming together, they're like a broader plan to do what they're doing there. Like that's really exciting stuff. But you're absolutely right. There's all these economic shifts, and the boomer generation is going to die off. And, I think it's also one of those things where it's going to be harder for immigrants, even if we're not deporting them aggressively, which, fingers crossed, maybe we get some of that. But, their things are going to get expensive, and it's not going to be easy for them. They're going to kind of get pushed out. And so there is this opportunity to buy up land and houses and do something, take advantage of this shift, right? There's that saying, I hope you live in interesting times. And it basically, if you tell that to a rich person, well, it's kind of like an insult, right? You're telling, because if you're a rich person, you really only have one way to go, and that's down. But if you say that to someone who's smart and ambitious and driven, right? Those moments of turmoil are the opportunity to kind of move from, a kind of a tough situation into something and make the most of that. So I think we are on the verge of that. That's been another thing that I try to incorporate into any of the podcast episodes. The content is trying to give people a heads up on that. How do you take advantage of that? How do you position yourself? Because again, if we are trying to put out information, this is one of the big frustrating limiting parts of just being a anonymous account on the internet, is there's only so much information that you can put out there that's valuable. But for me, I'm always like, okay, I'm trying to maximize signal and minimize noise. What is that thing that's going to be valuable? Well, it's information, higher level information that people can act on a more individual level and find success with. And so stuff like that, it's definitely a big piece of how we make sure that our guys are set up to win.
Josh Ham says, our guys are healthy, getting married, having children, and being successful by embracing the suck. Don't you want to be our guy, Anon? Come on, Normie, get in. We're having fun and building stuff. And I talked to Wade Stotts this afternoon, and one of the things that he said is that as you find yourself being radicalized, you got to make sure that you're still fun to be around. Like, it seems like a really simple, obvious observation, but like, you can't be as things become more and more normalized and people are looking for new leadership, you have to have some base level of attraction. You have to be entertaining, you have to be well spoken, you have to be charismatic, or you have to have leaders who are. Because people will ultimately, back when I was shitting all over libertarians as I was on my way out the door, I said that it's not that people aren't libertarians because they haven't heard enough about libertarianism. They're not libertarians because they've met libertarians, and they don't want to be anything like them. They think they're a bunch of weirdos. So like you have to be able to, you have to have the real world cred, and I've said to a lot of people that lately on the show that the one thing that our guys really need is to know how to sell. And I see this sort of thing, especially among the types of accounts that we're talking about, that they really shit on the self-improvement Twitter. The guys who are like the fitness guys or the Peter guys, the health guys, or the entrepreneurship and business guys. And it's like they look down on these guys and are like, oh, this is a bunch of grift and these people aren't serious and you shouldn't take them seriously. And I'm like, no, I think it's the other way around. This is some of the most important content that could be out there, helping you improve your body, helping you improve your mind, improving your skills, your ability to make money, your ability to socialize with people. These are all like crucially important.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hey guys, I'm back. Dimes from Blood Salad.
What's up?
Great to be here. Allow me to repeat the first entire thing I said. No, what I'm going to say is there's a couple of reasons I think people might be wary talking about, and it's not fair. I think Jordan Peterson kind of ruined that, even though I don't really have anything too negative about Jordan Peterson. But whenever you hear a self-improvement thing, someone chimes in with like, oh yeah, wash your penis, right? And it's the fact of the matter is that self-improvement has been rife with grifters for so long, and it's very hard to find a good one. So people are just like they should be. And I agree with what you're saying. And a lot of people, so anytime they hear fix yourself, clean your room, get your own house in order, they think you're trying to divert kind of isolationist, atomized living. And so it's a uphill battle to convince people that that's not what you're doing. But I think very filter, I think we need, and we're seeing that now, especially because there's more of an influx of people coming to our side, but also a couple of things that were so popular is because we kind of do this already, are intrinsically interested in us because we tend to be the guys compared to the left who are working out, who are gaining skills, tend to, entrepreneurship's kind of nerdy, but a few years down the line, it's good to have your own stuff in order. That's attractive to women. So we already work on a few qualities that are attractive to women, but also that's the type of stuff you need in people, because historically we're pretty good at trying to weed out bad actors and characteropathic people. There's a lot of crazies in our sectors. And we give ourselves a hard time by saying that, we attract weirdos. We're actually pretty good at getting weirdos out. Those who've been kicked out of our spaces that are being adopted by the Lawrence Southern. I'm talking any fucking mouthy bitch who's they got chased the fuck out because they were pieces of shit, and now they're welcomed with open arms. Radfem Hitler, there's another. I said I wouldn't mention names, but some insane cunt who's just being adopted by the left because we have a bar slightly higher than here, and that helps us stand the test of time.
Here. So Meta, What about? Do you have more thoughts on outlining, I guess, the current state of things?
Yeah, well, actually, I did want to get back to the Trannygate stuff, and I think actually mentioning Lawrence Southern is a good gateway back into that, because a lot of the people who initially caught my attention as people who needed to be kicked out, one of the main villains in this story is Brianna Wu. And for a lot of old hats, that I wasn't around during Gamergate, but I got kind of filled in on all of this information, kind of recently. But Brianna Wu is a old villain of the Gamergate stuff, and an MTF tranny. For a second.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Okay, it
It's
was me
Ryan.
this time. Haha.
No. it's still me. I don't know if it's like.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so people might remember Brianna Wu, like me, if you've been terminally online for long enough. We're talking.
Yeah. And I just recently saw Brianna Wu yucking it up with Lauren Southern, and it's just like, holy shit, this person is literally antithetical to everything we're supposed to be doing in the space. And yet, Brianna Wu is yucking up with Lauren Southern. Like Richard Hanania is another name, like who, and he's just from a physiognomy checkpoint, you look at that guy and you're just like, holy shit, this dude's a goblin.
He's got weird drag queen eyes.
Yeah, it's creepy. Don't say I didn't warn you if you don't know and you go and look that up. But all these people seem to getting cozy. They keep starting to notice all the human biodiversity, and that was you mentioned Red Scare. Those were kind of the people that initially were attracting my attention. And for me, I think there's nothing good that's going to come of having those people in the space. Even if you're trading some, visibility, you're compromising so much on, values and ethics that you've kind of lost the plot. So, that was the initial thing that I was going after. And really the lightning rod that kicked all of this off was there was a certain tranny named Pariah the Doll. And Pariah the Doll put out a post that was basically a picture of the front cover of Man's World magazine, and then a picture of themselves in the centerfold of Man's World, and the caption read, "Where is my money?" And to me, that was like, holy shit. I think a lot of people didn't know that picture was in there. And a lot of people very understandably had a lot of questions about that. And I won't go into a lot of the details, but basically, kind of asking those questions, I was on the forefront I'd already been going after the post left and all these people, and Pariah runs in that circle. They had made a tranny freaking movie, starring Pariah. And then it seems its effort is to try to normalize trannyism. And they had a second one planned with Brianna Wu. My question is like, all right, how is this person this close to the space that they're, getting in ostentatiously, distant right content? And what, in asking this question and kind of pushing at this out, my expectation from the general scene was going to be like, oh yeah, that shouldn't have happened. We should, we should be more careful or something. But instead it was this giant wave of like, that's not a big deal, or why are you so mad, bro? Or just, and then it was just a lot of ad hominem attacks and all of these kinds of things. And I was just like, holy shit, this is not how I expected this to go at all. But I felt very confident in my position here. I don't think the tranny question being a basic bar for membership in or kind of acceptance in the dissident right is that big an ask. I think it is actually the base. It's the minimum necessary bar. And yeah, so then the funny thing about this is I have a lot of very big accounts who, as we were talking about earlier, right, they're trying to be take sellers. They're trying to have as much attention as they can. And, we were talking a little bit about this before. I think part of this is with these ideas getting popular, they need to now move over to the left, right? It's this, if you've ever studied like game theory stuff and how it applies to politics, it's always the politician who, kind of sits in the middle, between, in the rest of the political spectrum that's going to gobble up the most voters. And I think it's similar here, is if you have a bunch of people who are now willing to say the N-word, then you have to kind of sit in the middle of all their politics if you're trying to maximize for engagement. But again, the problem with all of this is, well, then you expose yourself as not caring about these things and wanting engagement. And so the last thing I'll say is, that's why I think the conversation about what do we do after is so important. Because if you want to create a new method of identifying who's just grifting off the ideas versus who actually believes in the ideas, the people who actually believe understand we have to build something after that, after all of this, after people get the human biodiversity and the destruction of Western civilization. They need to become good people and go out and build and put their money where their mouth is. And if they're not doing that, well, they're optimizing for audience as opposed to, real first principle beliefs.
Yeah, and that's a good point. If I could just give some context for how I approach this whole thing, because the recent blow up with this individual named Pride the Doll, this was just the last domino in back a few years of me always coming across photos of this damp looking goblin freak. And why the fuck's that thing there? I don't know. That's like a Peter Thiel thing. What the fuck was going on with this weird creature? And I'm not going to bullshit on me all they want, but many of us in this panel are pretty connected to other creators. And there have been a few individuals who've hosted events in the past, for the past few years, who have told stories that, yeah, I keep getting contacted by people telling me to invite this pariah the doll. I don't know who this person is, but there's individuals who are interested in pushing this, create. I don't know what they fucking create. They're just there looking ghoulish, but they're like, oh, they're trying to make this thing happen, which makes why is this even happening at all? So this is what you would hear over the years. So when Meta came out with this, some people, this sounds new, just like his issues with, yeah, we've been talking about this for years, and we just thought it's like a weird thing that like that sector is into, because they're all about getting into the New York scene with art types. If you do that, you're eventually going to come across trannies and coke women and cigarettes with arms and legs, right? So that's just par for the course. But seem to be a bug anymore as much as it is a feature. We're looking at this more closely, and that's why I took an interest in individuals. And this is not just with like the man's world thing, because we can go back and forth what was a mistake, what was planned. I don't know how it all hashes out. But you also mentioned Richard Hanania. A lot of individuals. Richard Hanania used to be a writer for the Daily Stormer. Andrew Anglin's very, very popular. He's one of these guys. Seriously? Yes, and that was the whole thing. He kind of that got outed like this year, I think. It was under a different name, but
yeah. Real quick, I'll just say that when I
to
named him, a bunch of people came out and they were like, "He's not post left. He's always been like right wing or something like that." And I was just like, So.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. So you're Walt Bismarck would be another, Anatoly Karlin would be another, Richard Spencer would be another. There's a whole movement right now of former alt-right guys who are moving into, I won't call it liberalism, because I don't think they would call themselves that, but they're trying to leave the alt-right behind, because they, my own reading between the lines here, he was outright saying this, that they're all dysgenic. Them, we want to appeal to a better class of people, which ostensibly are writ liberals. And so they think we must meet these people where they stand, and we must try and make more friends with all the people we didn't want to before, which are trannies, which are, dysgenic free words, not them. But like that begs the question, well, wouldn't you broker a relationship with? Is there form a connection with in your own power or centralizing your own influence? And is that just a losing game? Like, do we need to have these lines in the sand? And in my opinion, that's saying in his own way, which is like, look, we should draw a line question. And a lot of people agreed with that. A lot of people didn't. I was surprised by the people who didn't, but it's part of a larger discussion. What does winning look like? Are there any people we wouldn't want to recruit to our side? It's strange in terms of sides because it's much more. But I think we should. Are there certain individuals or groups or identities have, like I mentioned before, there's these ideological anchors that fucking weight around our necks, cause problems down the line? It's very difficult for me to imagine where, you know, like a tranny can bring something to the fucking table. Dude, but I won't bog that down. I think you got a video pulled up here.
This is me when Richard Hanania walks in the room.
Get that ugly, disabled freak away from me.
Okay, that was all I had.
Okay, apparently my audio is still blanking out. I don't know.
You were actually pretty good for that.
Yeah, you were fine the whole
stretch.
time.
I don't know. I keep okay.
So,
well, there's still no.
I think we just gotta. It doesn't seem like there's necessarily a solution to it, so we just gotta keep pressing through. And it's been listenable to me. You know, you clip a few times, but it doesn't really drop words. It just kind of hangs up for a second and then catches back up. Okay, so one of the things it seems with the subject at hand here is there's a differentiation between identifying with a negative identity. That is like, we are not that thing. What we are is not that. And this is kind of what I think the libertarians do. They're like, what is a libertarian? A libertarian is not a statist. And I think that there's a trap for so-called right-wingers to turning themselves into just being not leftist. Like, this is all we are, is not leftist, but there isn't a positive thing that we stand for. There isn't a we aren't advocating for a thing, we're advocating for not thing. We're advocating for get rid of this, eliminate that, remove that, kill that, put that away. And there's a place for that, but then there has to be something else on top of that. There has to be a get rid of that and replace it with this. Eliminate that and install this. Knock this down and build this up. And it seems the grifting, I think, is easiest, especially for people who choose to remain anonymous. And I want to say, I don't think that there's anything wrong with remaining anonymous. I mean, Dimes is here. He's like, I think there's absolutely cause for a lot of people to be anonymous, and Meta's anonymous as well. Like, I think this is a good thing. However, if you do choose to remain anonymous, I think you have to recognize that there's a prime opportunity for someone who just wants to grift, who wants to say all the things, and maybe even truly believes all the things, but they prefer this setup where they get to be anonymous and say all the things, but never have to actually back it up, never actually have to put their stamp on something other than an idea that they can send out. And this ends up being a very risk-free kind of experience. You're not actually taking any risks. To take a risk is to advocate for something positive. Now, this wasn't necessarily the case till now. It was a risk to even just go say certain words on YouTube or on Twitter or wherever. But as that thing becomes popular, as that becomes mainstreamed, then the question becomes, do you have anything else other than that? Or are you simply just someone who built up a following by saying the things nobody else would say until the time arrived where other people started saying it? Well, then what do you do? Well, then where do we go from there?
Yeah, and this is, I've been kind of, again, putting together this article and thinking about all these ideas. And one of the best ways that I've kind of come around to thinking about this is think of, I've always kind of thought of the rage bait porn content as like a second matrix, right? So you think of like the first mainstream stuff, I call that the mainstream delusion. you have this kind of second layer that you can get caught in. It's like conspiratainment stuff, it's rage bait stuff, but it basically makes you ineffectual, right? Going back to a little bit, we were talking about the self-improvement stuff. You can get caught in self-improvement porn, right? We're just watching like, 7 effective habits or, whatever it is, right? You really just need to go out and do that. And that's a very
He drops out again.
Yeah. Sorry, it just clicks out for a second, and then I'm right back. But I guess my computer just doesn't want Dimes to feel alone as far as malfunctioning.
Thanks,
But
Meta.
The point that I'm getting at here is there's always bad versions of things, right? Or there's a lot of intellectualizing that you can do. You really need to actually go out and take action because, and this is why I think the spiritual component of a lot of this stuff is so important, right? Like it's very easy to say you believe something. This is why posting physique is so important, right? It's, do you really believe in being healthy and strong and fit? Well, the only way that you prove that belief is if you eat well and work out and do all of those things. And obviously there's, priorities. And if you have family or a job or, you're injured or whatever, right? But like, broadly speaking, it's action, the actions that people take that, their true belief, right? Because, in my mind, in kind of a spiritual sense, you need to be able to sacrifice in order to show belief. That's effectively what action is.
It's another example of that, and I was talking to some people about this the other day. It's a version of that is whether or not you would put money on it. Like, would you put, if you invest in yourself, you want to take care of yourself to prove that what you believe leads to positive results. Make a take or a prediction. $5,000. Next time someone says some shit about where the war is going, would you put? If not, then just don't fucking say it. Say something you believe and you've thought about. Just, most people wouldn't. That's just a different way I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But kind of going back to the point that I was getting at here is you now have this rage bait porn content sphere, right? And the audience for it is growing, but it also means you have this influx of grifters. So for example, you have the omni-liberal, right? Destiny, who's now doing human biodiversity posting and kind of also a mix of destruction of the West kind of posting, right? And I think we were talking about this earlier in the podcast, right? To me, the reason that all of these accounts who I think from what I understand the comments here, Dimes is just like, we hear him way better than the rest of the audience is hearing him. So I don't like the issue with my mic is I'm like, it's literally like a computer thing where it like kind of cuts out and reboots. But but anyway, to kind of keep going on this idea, right? My concern is that this area, this middle kind of barrier between mainstream delusion and then like actual parallel movement, parallel society, parallel building is kind of what I ultimately see what we need to be doing. It's getting bigger. It's getting stickier. Because then you're going to have people coming in and you're going to have more noise in there. So it's going to be harder to find that signal, that pathway out to the parallel movement. I think that's why, I really haven't, backed off despite the insane amount of hate I've been getting, is because I see this as both, it's an opportunity to highlight the hypocrisy and the lack of actual drive towards virtue and building, but also the people who were more likely to peel off getting stuck in that second layer are people who are kind of already here, and maybe they're not aware that they're just consuming, rage bait porn stuff, but by seeing the drama and seeing all this stuff, they're much more likely to say, oh, that makes sense. And now I know if I really want to move forward in a healthy and a positive way, there are certain content creators that I should consume less of, and I should touch grass a little bit more, or get involved in things, that kind of stuff.
I've been really pushing on the white pill thing here lately and going out of my way to highlight stuff, even if it's just sort of like mundane, wholesome content. I think that there's serious power in exposing your brain to that. That it will change your wiring, and it will change the way you look at the world. And I've been leaning into the white pills, and there's a couple other guys. Taylor Brown in the chat he's been our resident white pill dispenser for a while, and I think there's genuine power in that, and just consciously choosing to be optimistic and choosing to look on the bright side and choosing to have hope and tangible things and hope and belief in the future. I think that there's a legitimate like that's a unqualifiedly positive thing. And as I've been talking about this, I've been realizing I have people reaching out to me all the time, thanking me for that. Like you pulled me out of the doldrums. I was just getting stuck in the rage bait cycle, and because you're talking about this stuff, it's reignited, basically like reignited my passion for life. Like now I've had people who've gone to get like promotions at their job, and they've started going back to church and all this stuff. And it was weird for me because I'm just here, some guy just shooting my mouth off on a podcast talking about whatever's interesting to me. And then people start telling me, because you've been talking, I've been listening to you, I decided to go to start going back to church. And I wasn't even going to church at the time. So I was like, okay, well, apparently the Lord is sending me a message here. But that's been really the thing that's been near to my heart, is realizing that there's all these faceless people on the internet. There's all these guys that are out there, lurkers, people who aren't necessarily actively involving themselves in a conversation, but they're following it and they're tracking it. And they're like an army that's waiting for direction. They're waiting for somebody to tell them, go here, do this, work on this, fix this. And then I start making the connections with what's going on with the PayPal mafia thing, which now I've people have been telling me I need to plant my flag on that and keep reminding people I was right about it. It was just kind of an offhand observation that I started looking at that I thought was really interesting, and then realized this is really turning into something. And it's not that I'm saying, oh, these are guys that we need to follow, or that these are our new leaders. I'm saying these are guys who are taking up the mantle of a lot of these causes to some degree. They're not taking up the mantle of every cause. We're gonna have some responsibility here, but they're taking up the mantle on a lot of these causes: immigration, China, reindustrializing, bringing back manufacturing, all these different things. They're taking up the mantle of these causes, which means they're now beginning to clear the field for us, which gives us an opportunity to follow in behind them and benefit from whatever they're doing. I see them as kind of like a steamroller, and any progress that they make is a positive. They don't have to do the full thing. They just have to make some progress, and then we can backfill behind whatever they accomplish.
Yeah. And I think this serves both purposes, right? Like white pilling people, right, on a broad level, right? Because people want to, if they're going to work for something, this is a big thing. They want to know that if they do and put in that work, that something will come of that. There is a potential for success. I used to coach my sport of rowing, and when I was coaching my kids, I coached high school, and the novice rowers would come in, and I'd sit them all down. It'd be their first day of practice, and I tell them, look, it's going to suck. You're going to work hard. It's not easy to be a rower. It's physically exhausting, but if you listen to me and you work hard and you put in your effort, I guarantee you by the end of the year, you'll walk away the season with a medal around your neck. Novice rowers, if they're rowing in unison, if they're physically fit, they can pull medals in regional events. And I think like having that motivation, knowing that you're going to get something out of the work you're putting in, that's really important. I do a lot of spiritual content in kind of addition to the just kind of, zeitgeist political posting. And one of my good mutuals, his name is Mudra. We kind of initially started the Sunday Metaspaces, and we've talked about the necessity of the spiritual component in all of this, because once you understand that you're not just this kind of random amass of cells and molecules, that there is something transcendent to who we are, that's also another kind of white pill of, well, there's something more after this. There's a reason to work hard, even if it doesn't like quote unquote work out, right? It's about the experience. It's about the journey. It's about, putting yourself out there and working hard. Like there is intrinsic value in that by itself. And I think that's another thing. The final point that I'll make, just to kind of comment on the whole white pill idea, like I couldn't agree with you more. right? It's the way I explain this, and I've gotten some hate for the quote unquote like the secret kind of vibe posting that I do, but there is very easy kind of materially based explanations for why thinking about something will lead you to a better path in and of itself. And there's this phenomenon where if you go and buy a new pair of shoes and you get like a new pair of Nikes or something like that, you're going to start seeing Nikes, other people wearing Nikes. Or if you buy a certain car, you're going to see those cars a little bit more frequently. And it's not that people around you just went out and all bought those things. It's that your brain, the way that it sees the world, it's just picking up on those things just a little bit more. It's a little bit more in tune. And if you do that with white pilling, right? If you think about, all right, I need to do this, I need to find good friends, that I can group up with. I need to, think about improving my life in this way, this, that, or the other way, right? The way that you see the world, you're going to be able to see those pathways a little bit better. And so I think that if you are on that kind of white pill positive posting wavelength, you're just going to find over time that you're starting to take better action in your life, and more opportunities are going to seem to present themselves. It can be a spiritual thing, right? You can talk about it in that way, but just kind of like focusing your mind on that, even if you're not a spiritual person, like, it'll lead you down the right path.
Dimes, are you going to say something?
I'm going to risk saying something. I know it's going to cut out, but just bear with me, people. Stop taking pills entirely. If you have to, pick a black pill, pick a white pill. But I think white pills can also have an anesthetizing effect on people. When you mentioned that people are looking for a leader, that is true. I think they need to be dissuaded from that, because those, in every instance I've seen, lead into a cult of personality. I think someone in the chat mentioned Nick Fuentes as an example of someone I'm stealing from. And Nick Fuentes is actually a great example of someone who has no first principles. And if you look, they've routinely betrayed everything he claimed for. He said every stripe of degenerate, and he's the anti-Semitic guy right now. But one of the do on the America First platform is get a Jewish woman elected to Congress. So that's a great example of someone, whatever the fuck it takes to survive. But what I was saying was, when young men want leaders, they want leadership, they want. If you're out there looking for a leader or you're going to personality and get all of your resources siphoned from you. It's incumbent on those who have leadership to offer people a plan, and in this case, a good plan is a good plan template is something that they can take into their own lives with their group, their crew. They have now a strategy that they can do real world, whereas no matter what, if you're just in the pill game, you're just keeping people on a plantation. And I think that's a responsibility that most of us aren't really cut out for. It's a loser's game. The idea is, if you get people's attention, you almost want to be an anti them out in the world with the tools to do it themselves, because otherwise you're just gathering up like an island of misfit turn against you, as we've seen time.
It's funny, when you first started your comments there, I thought that you and I were going to have a fight, but now I realize we actually agree. And I something kind of synthesizing what you were just saying, and then what Meta was saying before that. I think first of all, the idea. Well, one of the things that I think, if you're talking about the sorts of things would be disqualifying to someone, recognizing them as a friend, would be any sort of like rejection or skepticism toward the introduction of the spiritual into the conversation. Because, I mean, elite theory itself is a spiritual concept. Race consciousness is a spiritual concept. If by 2024 you don't have some sort of an awareness of these metaphysical phenomena that are not necessarily going to be something you can put in a chart. They're not going to be something that you can just categorize in the really autistic liberal Western way. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. There's very obviously spiritual phenomena that are at work, and these are. I think that our modern era our generation is very technologically sophisticated and spiritually like infants in its spiritual infancy. We're like spiritual infants. There's an entire realm of reality that we don't even engage in. We're not even aware of its presence. And interestingly, I do think that becoming more aware of that presence and learning how to operate within that world actually drastically increases your technological capacity, which can, there's a story of the Promethean fire there. Might be a sort of a different conversation, but with what you're saying, I think one of the messages that I've been working on here and talking to people about is the idea that you don't need to be looking for a leader. You need to start being one. You need to act like one. If you want a Caesar, if you want a king, if you think, oh, this will just solve the problem if Caesar shows up and executes all my enemies and rules with an iron fist, then everything will be solved. Well, that Caesar's never going to show up if it doesn't have people who are ready and prepared to operate within that realm. Caesar is something that you ultimately, if that's something you want, that's something that's going to have to be manifested. It's going to have to be manifested by people men beginning to act like Caesars over their own domains and maximizing the efficiency and the vitality of their own domains. And if you can do that, this is the Jordan Peterson message. If you can clean your room, then you can start looking at things like cleaning your neighborhood and then extending out to cleaning your city. But you can't on one hand make a career off of shitting on shit liberty and then turn around and say, oh, we need some sort of universal solution to all of our problems. Someone to just come in and flip a switch and issue orders from the top down and just solve all the problems, because that plainly does not work. And it's where we live, the times we live in now, I believe, are evident of that.
Yeah. And this has been a big focus of my content. So one of the first area that I focused on was creating stuff what I call the journey, right? It's the 5 steps to how an Anon should kind of orient themselves in the parallel movement, right? Find their way forward. And the first step is awakening, right? Figuring things out. The second step is framework building. So understanding, how to orient yourself, right? Building a mental map. And really that's about establishing values so that you can then determine goals and then find the information that you need to achieve those goals. And then it's self-improvement. The 4th step is creation and networking. And then the 5th step is world improvement. And so the reason I bring that up is you mentioned you have to make yourself stronger, and then you have to go out and use that strength in the world around you. And that's exactly kind of the path of progression. And I also completely agree with your whole point of like, there is no cavalry coming, right? We need to be our own cavalry, right? You need to be willing to, pick up, move somewhere. About that. Yeah. Times doesn't feel alone, but you need to be willing to kind of take those risks. And it's difficult. I've talked to a lot of Anons, and they'll say things like, well, look, it's hard with family, especially if you have like wife and kids, or even if you're just a young person, you want to be more around your parents and your more extended family. It's hard to pick up and move, but if you're going to be somewhere, I think you need to find a way to contribute broadly, and getting involved in local politics like that.
It's actually worse when Meta cuts out than when Dimes does.
Why is it worse? Why would you have to say a thing like that?
And then Dimes really but yeah, so the what was I saying? Well, so Dimes says all the time, like, we only need like 3 guys to completely dismantle like an NGO, right? You could really fuck their shit up just by, spam mailing them or doing all of these other kind of like totally legal and innocuous things. But, and it's, to me, one of the, so I had Dimes on my podcast a couple of months back. And part of the reason that I was so excited to have him on was because he seemed to me to be like one of the only people who, like was actually talking about these kinds of ideas and pushing them forward. And that was refreshing because, it is really frustrating to the degree that the dissident right just seems very uninterested in actual solutions, and it's much more of this rage bait, porn belly aching, with this idea of like, oh yeah, saying the N-word is just cool and edgy.
And you know what? If it is cool and edgy, then sure. But then what? You
Yes.
know, on our winning actually look like? We actually have, like I said, a lot of rhetorical wins. But what's the next step? And one thing I said before is that I don't think I'm I think that was an issue that the masses would be red pilled, and then they all have a plan for day 2 of what that looks like. And Eaton figures who are just taking our points and parroting them. And I just want to I'm going to try in this again as short amount of time as I can. I just wanted to circle back to this. There's this great book published by Imperium Press on Violence by George Sorel, written in 1998 from the perspective of a French syndicalist guy, talking of the French Revolution, the syndicalist movement, and he made this point, very common, that those who lead revolutionary movements as some institution or society itself from a Marxist perspective, most of the time all they want is access to the higher strata of society. So you often see revolutionary, and the revolution is supposed to be, it's supposed to be, if you're just using it as a way to broker your go position, and you tends to be the route single quote unquote revolution. That's what they're talking about. And they're still talking about. What I was going to say in relation to us is I don't see, and I have never seen, any leader in our space recently within my adult life. I'm not talking about the 80s or 90s, but now I don't think there's any movement that could really survive direct contact with the system or the machine, were to really put you under scope. I don't think, and that includes up to whatever group the system really wanted to drill down into you and challenge you. I think most people betray everything, and that's not really a comment on them. That's just more of a that I think any leader, whatever their movement is, if the system really takes an interest in them. So you should not endeavor to have one figurehead. We don't, if we were to that would be the worst thing for. I don't think that philosopher king could survive the system as it stands. Now, what we should endeavor to do is a more destructure, because it's very difficult. You won't get as much, but you'll be more highly effective. Anyway, there's just be suspicious. Be one who's trying to gather everyone into one single spearhead.
I completely agree with that. Got a $10 super chat here from Slosher. He says, it's $10 Canadian. We're getting all the Canadian money today. Shout out dimes. Thank you, sir. He says, have you guys read Power of the Powerless, written by Czech writer Václav Havel in the 70s USSR? He wrote about parallel economies and the importance of living truthfully, similar stuff. I've actually had that book recommended to me a number of times, and I haven't read it. Have either of you guys?
I have not, but it's interesting. I first got exposed to the term parallel movement from, I believe it was Ivan Juros, who is also a Czech artist. So they might have bumped around the same community, and then that idea might have been encapsulated by that book. But that was what they were trying to do during I think it was like the Velvet Revolution, right? Is try to have this alternative parallel movement initially in culture, but then it spread through a bunch of other different things, right? And I do think you're starting to see that more broadly. Like, people are willing to get like raw milk, or get a share in beef from like their local farmers, or we have crypto that's popping up, and then we have these alternative ways to educate people. And I think people, if you kind of see things through that lens, there's a lot of things to be white pilled about, because we are starting to build these systems. The real problem that we have is the pipeline funnel of, how do we get guys that want to be involved and put them in a position where they can be helpful and help move the needle.
Okay, so it seems like the audio is getting worse, and I am recording this, but I think the recording is going to include all the audio issues, and I don't think you guys have local recordings of it. So I don't think this is going to get any better. What do you guys think of Because I think there's quite a bit more here we could touch on, getting into more, looking into the future and specific types of solutions and that sort of thing. But what do you guys think of doing a part 2 and coming back in, hopefully when the audio is a little bit better?
Yeah,
Or do you
I'd
just
love
wanna
to.
press
Is it
through?
just me, or is it like everyone? Because I don't know if it is. I can just hang back and let Meta go more.
Well, his has been dropping out as well, and his actually completely cuts out when it goes out. Yours glitches, but his drops out completely.
Yeah, I do notice when mine drops out and I do stop talking and pick it up. So as long as that isn't prohibitive, but I'm also down to do a part 2. I feel like we covered a lot of the really key points that I wanted to make just around, that we're at this inflection point. We were trying to make things cool. They're cool now. And so we need to shift. But it also means that we need to be thinking about what we need to do going forward. And, we've talked about a few of the ideas of white pill and, being virtuous and practically building. So that's kind of the core. There's a few other things that I think we could talk about around, like, what's actually going on in the scene, things we could tie it to, or we can get more specific into, what are the solutions kind of long term. But yeah, I'm happy to kind of just plan for a part 2 if you want to do that. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, I would be cool with continuing on, but the comments are saying it's getting worse and everything. So I think it'd probably be best to plan for part 2, and that'll give us a good. I've also done 7 hours of streams today, so I'm ready to pack it in. Okay, so sorry to everybody that the audio has sucked. Nothing we could do about it, but hopefully it's not going to be the case. Someone else is saying that AA was having a bunch of connection issues on his stream today, so maybe this is a YouTube thing. And of course, yeah, now everything's working just fine now that we're talking about it.
But I also haven't been fine. Apparently, it's just me.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's just call it. Let's plan on doing a part 2, and there's a couple other thoughts that I had that came to mind while we were talking here, and I want to grab some sources and bring some of that in here as well. So I think we're gonna have enough to fill an entire whole nother show. So we'll plan on when we're gonna do that. You guys have any last thoughts? I'll take that as a no.
For me, I don't know what I can say. It just enrages everyone, so I don't know if I should even try.
Okay, sounds good. Then go ahead and do your shilling. Hopefully, we can get through the shilling without any issues, and then we'll plan another one.
I don't know if Meta Prime is even there. Okay, at Legal Ironic and bloodsatellite.ca. You can find full episodes of the Blood Satellite there, and my handle's right there on the screen.
Meta, you there?
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of closing thoughts. I already said a little bit of what we hit on. I mean, again, I think this is a really good time to be having this conversation, just because it's so clearly visible on the timeline right now, and the more we can preemptively warn people to avoid this grift, I think the best people for us to be kind of pulling off of the scene and trying to inject into this kind of parallel pipeline is people who are already in the scene, right? So they have a little visibility into this. I've also seen a lot of people from the outside who are who look in and have been seeing this going on, and they're like, well, that's really weird. And I think it's good to kind of bring those people out of the woodwork a little bit and give them something to focus on and point to. So yeah, I mean, I'm excited for everything that's going on. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. We did get a little bit of hate in the comments, mostly me. But,
and it mostly came through Dime's comments.
Yeah. At times is we have a love-hate relationship. But yeah, no, it's I mean, I'm excited and I appreciate you having me on. And if people are interested in my content, my MetaPrime001 on X, and then I have a website that's metaprime001.com and a Substack as well. But you can find all my stuff there. And yeah, I'm excited to have a part 2 on this.
All right, sounds good, guys. Appreciate you for dropping in. Meta, I got to ask you, MetaPrime001, was this a setup? Do you already have MetaPrime002 ready to go for if you ever lose this account?
You know, I should. Now that you've done that, I'm sure somebody's going to go and snag it.
Right. I just killed it for you.
Yeah. Maybe I'll do some sort of like Fibonacci sequence or, you know, something like that. So I keep it interesting. But yeah, I know I'm still on the original one. I haven't gotten too spicy, and that's part of the reason that I'm not too worried about this. I have heard whisperings that, you know, these guys are pretty mad, and you know, I used to bump around face fagging their scene to meet people in network, and so they kind of know who I am. And you know, if I ever get doxxed, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, nothing too spicy on my timeline, which I think is good.
Yeah, I've been loving your tweets, man, and I'm looking forward to part 2 here. Thank you guys for showing up. Do us a favor, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share it, do all that stuff, and I will be on live again tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Central Time, with the Astrolabe. I've got a bunch more great stories for you guys, and looking forward to chatting with you then. So until